Okay, so I got this DM on Friday and I haven't slept since. The sender, will call him Hero, is basically living every introvert's worst nightmare. You know that feeling when you're home alone and you hear a floorboard creak and you're like, oh, it's just the house settling. But deep down, you know the house doesn't have a settling schedule. Hero lives in Fukuoka, tiny apartment. Very minimalist, very clean girl aesthetic, but for a 50-year-old dude. He's the type of guy who knows exactly where his soy sauce is. And that's where the ick starts. He starts noticing his fridge is gaslighting him. He buys a pack of 6 eggs. The next morning, there are 4. He's like, am I sleep eating? Is my metabolism finally popping off? But then the leftovers go. Then the orange juice level drops an inch. He tells me in the email, I live on the 3rd floor. No balcony. 1 door, dead-bolted. If someone is getting in, they aren't using a key. They're using magic, or they're already here. So Hero does what any sane person does. He goes to Reddit. He's posting on r legal this like, guys, I think my landlord is a snack thief. People are in the comments like, check for carbon monoxide. Classic Reddit move, shout out to that one legend. But Hero is like, no, the air is fine, but my vibes are absolutely rancid. He starts doing these little traps, very Home Alone but low budget. He puts a hair on the fridge door. It falls. He puts a piece of tape on the closet. It breaks. He's literally being ghosted by a roommate he didn't sign a lease with. The rent in Fukuoka isn't even that bad, but imagine paying 100% of the rent and only getting 60% of your snacks. Truly the biggest L in history. But then things get weird. It's not just food anymore. He finds the toilet seat is warm when he gets home from work. He lives alone. Unless his toilet has a built-in heater he forgot about, something is definitely sitting where it shouldn't be. Hero finally loses it. He buys a pet cam, you know, the ones that send a notification to your phone if it detects motion. He sets it up facing the kitchen. He goes to work, probably thinking he's going to catch a rat or a very athletic raccoon. He's at his desk, mid-meeting, and his phone buzzes. Motion detected in the kitchen. He opens the app, the feed is laggy, it's grainy. He sees himself. Wait, no, he sees a shadow. It's coming from the ceiling. No, it's coming from the storage cupboard above the closet, the place where you put your winter blankets. And the stuff you're too lazy to throw away. A pair of feet drop down, then a torso, then a woman. She's not a ghost. She's wearing his old t-shirt. She walks over to his fridge, opens it, and starts drinking milk straight from the carton. She's been living in his walls like a literal parasite. Hero calls the police. He's sprinting home, probably breaking every speed limit in Japan. He meets the cops outside. He's shaking, showing them the phone. She's in there, right now. They burst in. The apartment is silent. It smells like nothing, just his usual laundry detergent. They check under the bed. Nothing. They check the bathroom. Nothing. The cops start looking at Hero like he's actually lost his mind. Like, sir, did you take your meds today? Is the milk lady in the room with us right now? But Hero points to the top shelf. The tembakuro. It's this tiny, cramped space, maybe a foot deep. The cops get a ladder. One of them slides the door open. The cop screams. Like a genuine, high-pitched, I'm quitting this job scream. Tucked into a ball, hidden behind a thin stack of blankets, is a woman. She's been living there for 365 days. Her name was Tetsuko, 58 years old. She wasn't a ninja, she wasn't a spy. She was just homeless. She found his door unlocked a year ago, slipped in, and found the one place he never checked. She had a small mattress up there. She had a reading light. She had been watching him live his entire life. When he watched TV. She watched through the crack when he slept. She came down and walked around. Think about your own room right now. Look at that one cupboard you haven't opened in months. That space under the stairs. The gap behind the furnace. We think of our homes as secure, but security is just an illusion we pay for. But here's the thing. Hero sent me this story, right? He said the police took her away. He said he changed the locks. He said he moved to a new apartment because, obviously, the vibes were scorched earth. but he attached a photo to the email. It's a selfie of him in his new place. He's smiling, trying to show he's okay. But if you look at the top right corner of the photo, in the reflection of the hallway mirror, there's a small white storage cupboard, and the sliding door is open exactly 2 inches. And I swear to God, if you zoom in, there's a pair of eyes that aren't his. Tatsuko wasn't the only one who knew how to hide. Don't check your closets tonight. You might not like what you find. I got this email submission a few weeks ago from a sender I'm going to call Chloe, and honestly, guys, I had to take a walk around the block after reading it because my paranoia was absolutely peaking. I was checking behind my own curtains like an absolute weirdo. Chloe's story is a lot. It's the ultimate the math isn't mathing situation when it comes to living alone. A little over a year ago, Chloe was going through it. She had just gotten out of a 5-year relationship that ended so spectacularly bad it was giving literal Greek tragedy. She needed a hard reset. She wanted that dark academia, independent woman, main character era. She lived in a city where the rent is so high it's basically an extortion racket, but she managed to find a listing for a studio apartment in a historic Victorian home that had been chopped up into different units. When she toured it, the landlord, this older guy named Mr. Henderson, was giving off major NPC energy. Just very monotone, barely looked at her, handed her the keys, and basically said, "Don't break anything." But the apartment? Gorgeous. High ceilings, original crown molding, real hardwood floors. It was everything. But the centerpiece of the room was this massive, built-in, dark mahogany wardrobe. It took up almost an entire wall. It was stunning, but it was bolted to the floor and the wall. Mr. Henderson specifically told her, "That stays. It's historic." Chloe thought, okay, free storage, I love it. She signs the lease. But the very first night she slept there, she woke up at like 3 a.m. to the feeling of a freezing cold breeze blowing directly on her face. Which is weird because all her windows were painted shut. The draft was coming from the direction of the wardrobe. Now, if you're like me, you feel a ghost draft on night one, you pack your bags and go back to your mom's house. But Chloe is braver than I am. She gaslit herself. She was like, it's an old house, it's drafty, I'm just being delulu. For the first month, things were mostly fine. But there was this vibe, you know, when you're in an empty room, but your brain keeps telling your body you aren't alone. Like the air pressure is wrong. Chloe was living in a constant state of that. And then there was the smell. Around week 5, Chloe started noticing a scent. She described it in her email as smelling like old pennies and wet laundry. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was always there, specifically lingering right around the left side of that massive mahogany wardrobe. She bought like 12 Bath and Body Works candles, plugged in diffusers, did the whole deep clean. But every time she came home from work and unlocked her door, before her nose could adjust to the room, the scent of old pennies hit her in the face. And then the displacement started. Have you ever put your keys on the kitchen counter and the next morning they're on the coffee table? You just assume you have short-term memory loss, right? Chloe would buy a 12-pack of Diet Coke. She'd drink 2. The next day, there would only be 8 left. She'd find her favorite hoodie draped over the back of her desk chair when she swore she tossed it in the laundry basket. She told me, I genuinely thought I was developing early onset dementia or that the carbon monoxide alarm was broken. She actually bought a carbon monoxide detector because TikTok told her that's why people hallucinate ghosts. But it reads 0. At this point, we are 2 months in. Chloe's mental health is taking a hit. She's sleeping with the TV on. She's constantly exhausted. She starts having these hyper-realistic dreams where she's paralyzed in bed and she can hear someone chewing food in the dark, just wet, slow chewing. She brought this up to her best friend, a guy named Marcus. Marcus is your classic golden retriever bestie. Super handy, builds his own PCs, wears a lot of Carhartt, you know the type. Marcus tells her she's just stressed from the breakup and offers to come over and help her do a massive apartment purge to clear the energy. So Marcus comes over on a Saturday. They are blasting music, cleaning everything. Chloe is dusting the top of that massive wardrobe. She uses a step stool to get up there. And while she's wiping the dust away near the back edge, closest to the wall, she finds a handprint. Not a dusty handprint, a handprint made by someone wiping the dust away. And the fingers were pointing toward the room, meaning whoever put their hand there was reaching over from behind the wardrobe. Chloe shows Marcus. Marcus, trying to be the voice of reason, is like, hey, it's probably from the maintenance guys before you moved in. Or maybe Mr. Henderson was checking for termites. But Chloe isn't having it. The math is definitively not mathing anymore. The draft, the missing Diet Cokes, the smell, and now this handprint. She becomes hyper-fixated on the wardrobe. She gets down on her hands and knees with a flashlight and looks at the baseboard where the wardrobe meets the floor. It's bolted down with these heavy, rusted iron brackets. But when she shines the light into the tiny crack between the wood and the floor, she sees something shiny. She grabs a wire coat hanger, untwists it, and slides it under the gap. She hooks the shiny thing and pulls it out. It's a wrapper, specifically a wrapper for a peanut butter Cliff Bar. Chloe doesn't eat peanut butter. She's deathly allergic to it. She doesn't even allow it in her apartment. At this exact moment, while she is staring at this wrapper on her floor, her phone buzzes. It's a text from Mr. Henderson, the landlord. The text says, "Please keep the noise down. I've had complaints. It is 2 p.m. on a Saturday, and she and Marcus are just playing Spotify on a Bluetooth speaker, not exactly a rave. But more importantly, Mr. Henderson doesn't live in the building. He lives 2 towns over, so who complained and how did he know?" Chloe looks at Marcus. She is visibly shaking. She points at the wardrobe and says, "We are moving it right now." Marcus looks at the iron bolts. He says, "Chloe, it's bolted to the floor. We'd need a socket wrench, a crowbar, and if we scratch these floors, say goodbye to your security deposit." Chloe literally says, "I do not care about the deposit. I will pay you. Go get your tools." So Marcus drives back to his place to get his heavy-duty toolkit. Chloe is left alone in the apartment for about 45 minutes. This 45 minutes, Chloe says, was the longest of her life. She sat on her bed, just staring at the wardrobe. She turned off the music. The apartment was dead silent. About 20 minutes in, she hears a sound. It's faint. It's coming from behind the heavy mahogany wood. Scuff, pause, scuff, like someone in socks shifting their weight on a hard floor. Chloe freezes. She pulls out her phone and texts Marcus. "Hurry up," he replies, "Pulling up now?" Marcus comes rushing in with his toolbox. He takes one look at Chloe's pale face and drops the jokes. He gets right to work. He gets on the floor with the socket wrench. The bolts are old, covered in layers of paint and rust. It takes him a solid 20 minutes of sweating and cursing, but finally he gets the 4 bolts off the floor. He stands up, wipes his forehead, and looks at Chloe. "Ready?" They both put their hands on the side of the massive wardrobe. On 3, they push. It is incredibly heavy, but with a horrible, loud scraping sound against the hardwood. The left side swings out from the wall about 2 feet. A wave of that smell old pennies and wet laundry, mixed with extreme body odor, floods the room. Chloe gags. Marcus grabs his heavy-duty Maglite flashlight and shines it into the space they just exposed behind the wardrobe. Behind the wardrobe wasn't just a blank wall. It was a door. A small, seamlessly cut wooden door, maybe 4 feet high, painted the exact same color as the surrounding wall so it would blend in perfectly if the wardrobe wasn't there. There was no doorknob, just a simple iron latch on the outside and a heavy sliding deadbolt on the inside, meaning whoever was in there could lock themselves in. Marcus and Chloe just stand there, frozen. Marcus reaches out and unlatches the exterior hook. He uses his flashlight to push the little door open. It creaks inward. It's a crawl space, but it's not for pipes or wiring. It's a room. A hidden, windowless room about the size of a walk-in closet sandwiched between Chloe's apartment and the hallway. Marcus steps inside first. Chloe follows right behind him, her heart hammering against her ribs. The beam of the flashlight cuts through the dark. The first thing they see is a camping chair in the center of the space. Beside it is a plastic bucket that smells absolutely foul. Surrounding the chair is a graveyard of trash. Empty water bottles, discarded Tupperware containers, and a dozen empty wrappers of peanut butter Cliff Bars. But that wasn't the worst part. Marcus sweeps the flashlight to the left wall. Chloe lets out a noise that she described as a sob trapped in her throat. The drywall is covered in photographs, Polaroids, dozens of them, taped neatly in rows. Marcus steps closer, illuminating them. It's Chloe, every single photo. Chloe sitting at her desk, studying. Chloe cooking pasta in her tiny kitchen. Chloe watching TV on her laptop. Chloe sleeping. The angle of the photos is what made Chloe's stomach drop to the floor. They weren't taken through a window. They weren't taken from a hidden camera in the vent. The angle was low, straight on. They were taken from inside her room. Whoever lived in this space waited until she was dead asleep, unbolted their little hidden door, pushed the back panel of the wardrobe, which, it turns out, was on a quiet hinge slipped into her room, and just took photos. Walked around her apartment, drank her Diet Cokes. Chloe is hyperventilating. Marcus is physically shaking. He grabs her arm and says, "We are leaving. Now I'm calling the cops." As he turns to guide her out of the crawl space, the beam of his flashlight catches one last photo, sitting alone on the seat of the camping chair. It's a Polaroid of Chloe. She is asleep in her bed. But in this photo, lying next to her on her pillow, is a peanut butter Cliff Bar wrapper. Chloe reaches down with trembling hands and picks up the photo. On the bottom white margin of the Polaroid, written in black Sharpie, is a date and time. Yesterday, 3:14 a.m. They run. They leave the apartment door wide open, run down the stairs, and sit in Marcus's truck with the doors locked while they dial 911. The police arrive about 10 minutes later. 2 squad cars. They go up to the apartment with their guns drawn. Chloe and Marcus wait in the street. 20 minutes later, a cop comes down. He looks grim. He tells them the crawl space is empty. The person is gone, but he says they found something else. The crawl space didn't just end there. There was a drop-down hatch in the floor of the hidden room. It led down a narrow utility shaft, straight into the basement of the building. The police ask for the landlord's information. Chloe gives them Mr. Henderson's number and address. The cops go to Mr. Henderson's house 2 towns over to question him about the layout of the building and who had access to the basement. Guys, they found Mr. Henderson dead in his living room. He had suffered a massive heart attack. The coroner determined he had been dead for at least a week. So let's do the math here. Mr. Henderson had been dead for a week, which means he couldn't have sent that text message complaining about the noise earlier that afternoon. And he couldn't have taken the photo of Chloe yesterday at 3:14 a.m. So who was in the walls? The police get a warrant to pull the phone records for Mr. Henderson's cell phone, trying to figure out who had his phone and who sent that text to Chloe. They trace the ping of the cell phone. The phone was pinging off the cell tower located directly above Chloe's apartment building. The police search the building top to bottom. They finally find Mr. Henderson's phone tossed in a dumpster in the alleyway. They also start dusting the crawl space for prints. They pull a clear set of prints off the Cliff Bar wrappers and the Polaroid camera left behind. They run the prints. The prints belong to Marcus. Yeah, read that back. Her best friend. The golden retriever energy. The guy who came to save her. Here is what the police put together after they arrested him. Marcus had known about the hidden room for months. He had briefly dated a girl who lived in that apartment before Chloe, and he had found the old blueprints online because he was a total architecture nerd. When Chloe was looking for an apartment, he was the one who sent her the listing for Mr. Henderson's building. Marcus had been sneaking into the basement, climbing up the utility shaft, and living in that wall while Chloe was at work. He would slip in at night. He was the one moving her things. He was the one causing the draft. And when Mr. Henderson died, Marcus somehow found out. He went to the old man's house, stole his spare keys and his cell phone so he could monitor the building himself. He sent that text message complaining about the noise while he was standing in the same room as Chloe, just to fuel her paranoia. He helped her discover the room so he could play the hero. He wanted her to be so terrified that she would have to move in with him for safety. He literally staged a horror movie in her life just so he could be the final boy that saved her. He just didn't expect the cops to find the hatch to the basement so quickly, and he slipped up by leaving his own trash behind. Marcus is currently in prison. Chloe broke her lease, obviously. She moved back to her home state, bought a dog the size of a small horse, and she told me she now refuses to live anywhere that doesn't have an open floor plan. If there is a closet, she takes the doors off the hinges. So, yeah, that's the story of the door behind the wardrobe. Sometimes the call is coming from inside the house, and sometimes the monster in the walls is the person holding your hand, telling you it's going to be okay. So this next story is from a guy named Leo. He just moved into this vintage fixer-upper in LA, very haunted chic. I spent my life savings on dry rot vibes, but Leo isn't dealing with a ghost. He sent me a link to an old police file and said, "I think I'm living in the sequel." See, back in the early 1900s, there was this woman named Dolly Osterreich. If you think your situationship is messy, Dolly makes you look like a saint. Dolly was married to Fred, a wealthy apron manufacturer. Fred was a mid-head husband. He liked his booze, he liked his work, and he definitely didn't like Dolly as much as she wanted. Dolly meets this 17-year-old kid named Otto. She calls him her sewing machine repairman, which is basically the 1913 version of saying, "He's just my trainer, babe." But here's the thing. Dolly didn't want to sneak out to see Otto. She wanted him on call, 24/7. She convinces this teenager, who is clearly head over heels and lacking any survival instinct, to move into her attic. Not for a weekend. Not for a month. Leo, the guy who emailed me, said he found a small, hidden crawlspace in his new house with a single, rotted cigar butt and a scrap of paper from 1920. He thinks it was Otto's. Bedroom. Imagine living in a space so small you can't stand up, just so you can be near someone who's married to a guy living one floor below you. That's not love, that's a psychological thriller. So Otto moves in. This is where the apartment horror kicks in. Otto is literally a human pet. Dolly locks him in from the outside. He has a cot, a tiny desk, and a lamp. During the day, when Fred is at work, Otto comes down and they repair sewing machines. But at 5 p.m., when Fred's car pulls into the driveway, Otto has to go back into his hole. He has to be silent. No coughing, no heavy breathing, no main character energy. If he drops a pen, he could die. Fred is downstairs drinking whiskey, wondering why he hears scratching in the ceiling. He thinks it's rats. Imagine being Fred. You're eating dinner, talking about your day, and 3 feet above your head, your wife's boyfriend is staring at the floorboards, listening to you chew. The absolute ick of it all. Leo told me he tried to sit in his crawlspace for just 10 minutes to see what it was like. He said the silence is the worst part. You start to hallucinate sounds. You start to feel like the house is breathing with you. Otto did this for 10 years. 10 years, 2 different houses. When the Osterreichs moved from Milwaukee to LA, Dolly made sure the new house had a special attic for her. Hidden man, she literally had the house built around his hiding spot. Let's talk about the logistics, because my brain is lagging trying to understand this. Otto had to dispose of, waste. Dolly had to sneak him food. If Fred noticed the grocery bill was a little high for 2 people, Dolly would gaslight him into oblivion. "Oh, Fred, you know I'm a stress eater. Stop body shaming me." Dolly was the CEO of gaslighting. She convinced Fred he was hearing things for a decade. He thought he was losing his mind. He's going to doctors, he's thinking the house is haunted. Meanwhile, Otto is upstairs writing adventure stories. He actually became a published writer while living in an attic. But then Leo's email gets darker. He says he found a second viewing hole in his ceiling. One that doesn't look into the kitchen or the living room. It looks directly into the shower. Otto wasn't just hiding, he was watching. He knew every secret Fred had. He knew every time Fred was vulnerable. He was the ghost of the house, and he was starting to get territorial. In 1922, the simmer finally turned into a boil. Fred and Dolly are having a massive fight in the bedroom. Fred gets aggressive, he's yelling, maybe he puts his hands on her. Upstairs, Otto hears everything. He's been the silent observer for a decade, but the sim is glitching. He grabs 2.25 caliber pistols. The attic door bursts open. Fred, who thinks he's alone with his wife, sees a pale, spindly man who looks like he hasn't seen the sun since the Victorian era, sprinting at him with guns. Fred probably thought he was being mugged by a Victorian ghost. Otto doesn't say a word. He just fires, boom, boom. Fred is dead on the floor. Now, Dolly and Otto have a dead body and a major vibe check failure. What do? They stage a robbery. Dolly tells Otto to lock her in the closet from the outside and take Fred's expensive watch. Then, Otto the professional hider disappears back into the attic. The cops show up. They find Dolly locked in a closet. They find Fred dead. They're like, how did the robber lock you in from the outside and then vanish? Dolly's like, I don't know, he was really fast. The cops are suspicious, but they can't find anyone else in the house. They literally searched the house. They walked right under Otto. They didn't check the attic because the entrance was hidden behind a wardrobe. Otto sat there, holding his breath, inches away from the police. Years go by. Fred is buried. Dolly moves on. But she doesn't let Otto go. She keeps him in the attic of her next house. But she starts dating other men. Attorneys, businessmen. She's living her best widow life. And Otto is still in the ceiling. He's like the world's most loyal, most pathetic Discord mod. He's watching her bring home new guys. He's listening to her laugh with people who aren't him. He murdered for this woman, and now he's just the guy in the roof again. Eventually, Dolly gives Fred's watch, the one from the robbery, to one of her new boyfriends. The boyfriend is like, wait, isn't this the watch the police were looking for? He goes to the cops. The whole thing unspools. When they finally caught Otto, he didn't even look human anymore. He was the Batman of Los Angeles. Not the cool Batman, but like the I haven't seen a vegetable in 120 months Batman. So that's the historical story. Crazy, right? But remember Leo? The guy who sent me the email? The one living in the LA fixer-upper? He said he's been hearing the scratching again. He said he called the cops, but since there's no legal entry, they won't do anything. He decided to do his own investigation. He bought a thermal camera, the kind you attach to your iPhone. He sent me a video clip. He's walking through his hallway, pointing the camera at the ceiling. Everything is blue. It's a cold night. But then he hits the spot above his bed. There's a bright, glowing yellow shape, a human-sized heat signature, and it's not moving, it's just curled up. But here's the kicker. Leo lives in a modern condo. Built in 2022, there is no attic. There is no crawl space. There's only 10 inches of concrete between his ceiling and the neighbor's floor. I checked the floor plan for the unit above him. It's been vacant for 6 months, so whose body is heating up Leo's ceiling? Maybe Otto wasn't the last one to realize that the best way to keep a secret is to become part of the house. The story was sent in by a viewer we'll call Mark. Now Mark admits he's a city boy. His idea of agriculture before this incident was navigating the produce aisle at his local grocery store. But a few summers ago, desperate for cash to pay off his college tuition, he took a job helping his uncle on a massive corn farm in Nebraska. Mark's uncle had a couple hundred acres of corn, and Mark's job was essentially maintenance checking irrigation lines, repairing fences, and driving the perimeter in an old, beat-up Ford truck that smelled distinctly of wet dog and chewing tobacco. It was mid-July, the kind of oppressive, suffocating heat that makes the horizon shimmer. The corn was already head-high, creating a dense green wall that stretched on for miles. On his third day, Mark was out fixing a broken wire fence on the far eastern edge of the property. This area bordered an old, unused county road. As Mark was wrestling with a pair of pliers, he looked up and noticed a scarecrow standing about 30 feet deep into the cornfield. Now, scarecrows in modern farming are mostly decorative, or at least a relic of the past. This one was classic, a flannel shirt, faded blue jeans stuffed with straw, an old burlap sack for a head, and a wide-brimmed straw hat pulled down low. It was tied to a wooden crossbeam, slumped forward like it had given up on life. Mark chuckled to himself, thinking his uncle had a strange sense of humor. He finished his work, got in his truck, and drove back to the main house. He didn't think about it again until 2 days later. Mark was doing his perimeter check again. He drove past the same spot on the eastern edge. He glanced into the cornfield. The scarecrow was there, but it was closer. It was no longer 30 feet deep. It was about 10 feet from the edge of the field, right near the fence line. And it wasn't slumped forward anymore. It was standing rigid, its burlap face angled perfectly toward the dirt road. Mark stopped the truck. He stared at it. The Western humor in him thought, all right, Uncle Jim is playing a prank on the city kid. Mark rolled down his window and yelled, "Very funny, old man. You can't scare me." Only the dry rustle of the corn answered him. He drove back to the house and confronted his uncle over dinner, asking how long it took him to move the heavy wooden post just to mess with him. His uncle paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, and looked at Mark in genuine confusion. "What scarecrow?" his uncle asked. Mark explained the flannel shirt, the burlap sack, the whole setup. His uncle shook his head. "Mark, I haven't put a scarecrow in my field since 1998, and I sure as hell don't have the time to haul one around just to spook you." Mark felt a cold knot form in his stomach. If his uncle didn't put it there, who did? The next day, Mark had to check the irrigation lines near that same sector. He didn't want to go. He brought his uncle's heavy Maglite flashlight with him, holding it like a club. He drove the truck down the dirt road, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached the spot. He looked into the corn. The wooden crossbeam was there, planted firmly in the dirt, but the scarecrow was gone. No flannel shirt. No jeans, just a bare wooden cross. Mark froze. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. The wind wasn't blowing, but the corn stalks about 20 feet away were swaying violently. Swish, crack, swish. Something heavy was pushing its way through the dense stalks, and it was moving parallel to Mark's truck. Mark didn't wait to investigate. He slammed the truck into drive and floored it, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. He glanced in his rearview mirror just in time to see something step out of the corn and onto the dirt road. It was a man. A tall, impossibly thin man wearing a faded flannel shirt and a wide-brimmed straw hat. But he wasn't made of straw, and he was holding a rusted machete. The man just stood there in the dust cloud, watching Mark's truck speed away. Mark and his uncle called the county sheriff, who scoured the area. They found a small campsite hidden deep inside the cornfield, littered with stolen canned goods and animal bones. The man had been living out there for weeks, silently watching the farm. Mark quit the next day. He says he still can't drive past the cornfield without feeling eyes on him. The story comes from a sender named Sarah. Sarah grew up in rural Wisconsin, a place where cows outnumber people 3-1. Dairy farming isn't just a job up there. It's a relentless lifestyle. When Sarah was 20, her family's farm was short-staffed, so she volunteered to take the graveyard shift in the milking barn. The shift ran from midnight to 5 a.m. Now, Sarah loved animals. As she puts it, cows are basically giant, affectionate grass processing machines. They are creatures of habit. They don't like surprises, and they definitely aren't the masterminds of terror. The milking parlor was a long, concrete building lined with metal stalls. The routine was simple. Usher the cows in, attach the automated milking machines, wait, detach, and usher them out. To keep herself awake, Sarah always played a little classic rock on a dusty old boombox she kept by the sink. It was a Tuesday night around 2:30 a.m. Outside, a heavy thunderstorm was rolling through, masking any noise from the outside world. Inside, the humid air smelled heavily of milk, damp hay, and manure. Sarah was halfway through her rotation. She had just attached the machines to the current batch of cows and walked over to the sink to wash her hands. That's when the cows started acting up. Now, cows get spooked easily. A loud clap of thunder is usually enough to make them shift around, but this was different. They weren't just shifting, they were agitated. A massive Holstein near the back of the parlor let out a low, distressed bellow and started kicking at the metal stall. Sarah wiped her hands and walked down the aisle to calm her down. "Hey, easy girl, it's just the weather," Sarah muttered, patting the cow's flank. But the cow wasn't looking out the window at the storm. Her massive, dark eyes were locked onto the hayloft. The hayloft was an open second-story area that ran the length of the barn, accessible only by a wooden ladder at the far end. It was pitch black up there, save for the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah looked up. She squinted into the darkness. Nothing. She turned back to the cows, assuming a raccoon or a barn cat had knocked something over. But then she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Over the humming of the machines, over the driving rain, she heard a cough. It wasn't an animal sound. It was distinctively, undeniably human, a deep, wet, ragged cough, and it came from the loft directly above her head. Sarah froze. Her family was fast asleep in the main house, a good 300 yards away. Her cell phone was sitting on the counter by the boombox, out of reach. She told herself to be rational. Maybe it was her older brother checking on her. "Dave?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "That isn't funny." No answer. She took a slow step backward. Above her, the floorboards of the loft creaked, slowly, deliberately. Creak, creak, creak. Someone was walking up there, pacing, right above the stalls. Sarah's survival instincts finally kicked in. She abandoned the cows, abandoned her phone, and bolted for the heavy sliding doors at the front of the barn. She threw her entire body weight into the metal handle, sliding the door open just enough to squeeze through, and sprinted out into the pouring rain. She ran the 300 yards to the farmhouse in absolute terror, slipping in the mud, convinced at any moment a hand was going to grab the back of her jacket. She burst into her parents' bedroom, screaming for her dad. Her father grabbed his shotgun and they called the police. When the authorities searched the hayloft, they didn't find a person, but they found what the person had left behind. Tucked behind several large bales of hay was a makeshift nest. There were dirty blankets, empty food wrappers from their own pantry, and most disturbingly, several Polaroid photographs. The photos were of Sarah working in the barn, taken from the vantage point of the hayloft. The intruder had been living above her, watching her for who knows how long. And if that cow hadn't gotten spooked, Sarah isn't sure she would have made it out of the barn that night. The story comes from David, who experienced something deeply unsettling on a remote ranch in West Texas. Out in West Texas, the landscape is flat, unforgiving, and vast. When night falls, the darkness is absolute. The only light comes from the moon and the stars. David was in his late 20s, house-sitting for his parents while they took a much-needed vacation to Europe. The property was expansive, over 500 acres of scrub brush, dirt, and cattle. The house itself was a sprawling, single-story ranch home sitting at the end of a mile-long gravel driveway. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. The harvest moon was huge and bright, casting long, eerie shadows across the plains. David was in the living room, a half-eaten bowl of chili in his lap, watching an old Western on the television. He had the family's two Great Pyrenees dogs, Buster and Duke, asleep on the rug beside him. These dogs are bred to protect livestock. They are massive, fearless, and incredibly vocal if anything out of the ordinary happens. Around 11 p.m., Buster's head snapped up. His ears pinned back, a low, rumbling growl vibrated in his chest. A second later, Duke was on his feet, the hair on his back standing straight up. Both dogs trotted to the large bay window at the front of the house and began barking viciously. David sighed, annoyed. He figured a coyote had wandered too close to the property line. "Quiet down, boys," he said, walking over to the window to look out. He peered through the glass, letting his eyes adjust to the moonlight. About a quarter mile down the long driveway, a vehicle was slowly making its way toward the house. But something was wrong. The vehicle had no headlights on. David frowned. It was pitch black out there. The only way the driver could see the driveway was by the pale light of the moon. They were driving at a crawl, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. It was a dark-colored pickup truck, completely blacked out. A chill ran down David's spine. Out in the country, there is an unwritten rule. If you approach a stranger's house at night, you keep your headlights on so they know you aren't trying to hide. Driving completely dark is universally recognized as a massive red flag. David immediately shut off the living room lamp and turned off the television. Plunged into darkness, he watched from the edge of the window curtain. The truck rolled to a stop about 100 yards from the house, near the edge of the front gate. The engine cut off. Silence. For 5 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The dogs continued to growl, pacing back and forth. David stood frozen, his hand resting on the curtain. Then the driver's side door of the truck opened. There was no dome light inside the cab. A figure stepped out. The man was completely dressed in black, wearing a dark balaclava over his face. He didn't walk toward the front door. Instead, he turned and gestured toward the back of the truck. 3 more figures, all dressed identically in black, slipped silently out of the truck bed. David's heart plummeted into his stomach. This wasn't a lost traveler. This wasn't a drunk neighbor. This was a coordinated group, and they were creeping toward the house, fanning out in different directions. David didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? I'm at the Miller Ranch on County Road 42, David whispered, his voice shaking. There are 4 men outside my house. They're dressed in black and they're surrounding the property. The dispatcher's voice turned urgent. Okay, sir. I'm dispatching deputies now, but you are very far out. It will take them at least 20 minutes to reach you. Do you have access to a firearm? David swore under his breath. His father's gun safe was in the master bedroom on the opposite side of the house, and David didn't have the combination. No, he whispered. I don't... All right, keep the dogs with you. Lock yourself in a room without windows if possible. Do not make a sound. David grabbed the collars of the 2 massive dogs and backed away from the window. He retreated down the hallway to the guest bathroom, pulling the dogs inside and locking the heavy wooden door behind him. He sat in the dark bathtub, his arms wrapped around the dogs, praying they wouldn't bark. For what felt like hours, there was nothing but silence. And then he heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps on the gravel right outside the bathroom window. David held his breath. He clamped his hands gently over the dogs' muzzles. He heard a hand brush against the exterior siding of the house. Then, the jiggling of the bathroom window screen. Someone was testing it, trying to see if it would give way. A soft voice muttered something from outside, muffled through the glass. Another voice answered. Suddenly, the heavy front door of the house rattled violently. Someone was throwing their weight against it, trying to kick it in. The dogs went absolutely ballistic, barking and snarling loud enough to shake the walls. David braced his feet against the bathroom door, ready to fight for his life. The assault on the front door stopped. There was a tense silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of a heavy diesel engine roaring to life. Tires spun in the gravel. David didn't move until 20 minutes later, when he saw the flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff's cruisers through the frosted bathroom window. The deputies found deep boot prints all around the perimeter of the house. They found pry marks on the back patio door and the front door hinges. The sheriff told David he was lucky. A string of violent home invasions had been plaguing remote properties in the adjacent county. The crew would cut the power, breach the doors, and tie up the homeowners. If David hadn't noticed the dark truck, if he had left the TV on, they would have been inside before he ever had a chance to run. David hasn't spent a night alone on that ranch since. When you live in the city, the monsters you worry about are loud. They are the blaring sirens, the shouting in the alleyway, the shattered glass of a car window. But out in the country, the danger is quiet. It waits in the rustling stalks of a cornfield. It hides in the dusty rafters of an old barn. It parks with the headlights off at the end of a long, lonely driveway. The isolation of rural life offers a peaceful escape from the modern world. But it also strips away the safety net of society. Out there, if something goes wrong, you are entirely on your own. Story comes from a Reddit user named Nightshift Nate, originally posted to a subreddit dedicated to complaining about homeowner associations. If you've ever lived in a suburb run by an HOA, you know the true meaning of tyranny. You leave your trash can out an hour past sunset, and suddenly you have a $60 fine and a passive-aggressive letter stuck to your door. Nate was no stranger to this. He was a 28-year-old nurse working overnight shifts, and his neighborhood's HOA was notoriously strict. The original post was simple. Nate posted a screenshot from his Ring doorbell camera with the caption, "My A is literally sending people to stare at my lawn at 3 a.m. to check grass height. I'm moving." The screenshot attached to the post was grainy, illuminated only by the harsh, black and white infrared of the night vision camera. It showed Nate's front yard. And standing perfectly still on the edge of the sidewalk, facing the house, was a tall, thin figure wearing a dark windbreaker. Reddit users in the comments immediately pointed out a few things Nate had missed in his sleep-deprived frustration. First, the man wasn't looking at the lawn. The angle of his head indicated he was looking directly up at the second-story window, specifically the window of the master bedroom, where Nate's wife, Sarah, was sleeping alone while Nate was at the hospital. Second, the man wasn't holding a ruler or a clipboard. If you zoomed in on the man's right hand dangling by his side, he was holding a tire iron. When Nate read the comments during his lunch break at 4 a.m., the humor of the situation evaporated. He checked his live camera feed immediately. The sidewalk was empty. Panicking, he called his wife. She answered, groggy and confused, confirming that the house was locked, the alarm was set, and she hadn't heard a thing. Nate told her to lock the bedroom door anyway, and he called the non-emergency police line to request a drive-by of his property. The patrol car found nothing. The next day, Nate updated the Reddit post. He was furious, terrified, and ready to buy a firearm. But this is where the backstory begins. And this is where the situation stops being a creepy neighborhood encounter and turns into something deeply disturbing. A true crime enthusiast in the Reddit thread asked Nate for his general zip code to see if there had been any reported burglaries in the area. Nate obliged. 4 hours later, the user sent Nate a private message with a link to a local news article from 7 years prior. The article detailed a horrific domestic incident at a house in that exact suburb. A young man, heavily addicted to narcotics, had a violent breakdown and attacked his parents. He was arrested, served 5 years in a state facility, and was released just 3 months before Nate made his Reddit post. Nate checked the address in the article. It was his house. Nate and Sarah had bought the property as a foreclosure 2 years ago. The man in the windbreaker wasn't an HOA inspector. He was the former resident. Nate immediately took the Ring footage to the local precinct. When the detective saw the still image, he didn't even need to run a facial recognition scan. He recognized the man's posture and the windbreaker instantly. But the most terrifying detail didn't come from the police. It came from Nate's wife, Sarah. That evening, after learning the history of the house, Sarah was packing a bag. They were going to stay at a hotel. As she was clearing out the closet in the master bedroom, the same room the man had been staring at, she noticed a draft coming from the ceiling access panel that led to the small attic space above the garage. Nate grabbed a flashlight and pushed the panel open. The dust on the attic floor had been completely swept away in one corner. Sitting in that corner was a sleeping bag, an empty plastic water bottle, and a collection of fast food wrappers. The man in the Ring camera footage hadn't been standing on the sidewalk trying to figure out how to get inside. He was standing on the sidewalk looking out the window, waiting for Nate to leave for his night shift, so he could go back inside. To the attic he had never truly left. This one comes from user BroCollegeKid99, posted in a subreddit dedicated to thrift store finds and vintage furniture. There is a universal rite of passage in your early 20s, furnishing your first apartment with the absolute cheapest, most questionable items you can find on Facebook Marketplace. You ignore the weird stains. You ignore the fact that the seller insists you meet them in a dimly lit storage unit at twilight. You just want a couch that costs less than a week's groceries. Our sender, a 21-year-old student named Liam, hit the jackpot. Or so he thought. He found a listing for a gorgeous emerald green velvet mid-century modern sofa. In a trendy vintage shop, this thing would easily fetch over $1,000. The seller, an older woman named Margaret, was listing it for $50. Her description simply read, "Too big for my new place. Must go today." Liam rented a truck, drove to a sleepy, affluent suburb, and met Margaret. She was sweet, offered him lemonade, and even helped him push the couch out the door. Liam posted a picture of the couch in his new apartment to Reddit, bragging about the steal of the century. The caption read, $50 on Marketplace. It smells a little like mothballs and regret, but I think I won capitalism today. For the first week, the couch was perfect. But then Liam noticed the weight of it. He had dropped his phone between the cushions and tried to lift the main seat frame to fish it out. It was impossibly heavy. It felt like trying to lift a solid block of concrete. He also noticed a strange, metallic clinking sound coming from deep inside the upholstery whenever he sat down too hard. A few days later, Liam made a follow-up post on Reddit. He asked if anyone knew how to properly deep clean vintage velvet, because his apartment had started to smell faintly of copper like old pennies, and no matter how much Febreze he used, the metallic scent lingered. A user claiming to be an antique furniture restorer commented, "They told Liam to flip the couch over and check the dust cover on the bottom, the thin black fabric stapled under the frame. They suggested an old spring might have rusted and snapped, which could cause a metallic smell and the clinking sound." Liam followed the advice. He pushed the heavy sofa onto its back. The black fabric underneath wasn't stapled. It had a long, discreet black zipper running horizontally across the bottom. A modern, heavy-duty zipper. You don't find those on authentic 1960s furniture. Liam unzipped it. Inside the hollow cavity of the couch, stuffed between the wooden struts, were dozens of small, heavy, canvas bank bags. Liam pulled one out. It was heavy. He untied the top. It was filled to the brim with tarnished silver flatware. Forks, knives, antique spoons. He pulled out another bag. This one contained a massive collection of heavy vintage pocket watches and loose jewelry. He pulled out a third. It contained 6 passports, none of them belonging to a woman named Margaret. Liam didn't post again. He called the police. And this is where the backstory drops into a terrifying reality. When the police arrived, they dismantled the couch. Inside the base, they found over 80 pounds of stolen silver, jewelry, and personal documents. But it was the ledger that disturbed the detectives the most. Tucked into a Ziploc bag at the very back of the couch was a small moleskin notebook. Inside, written in neat cursive handwriting, were names, addresses, and dates. The detectives ran the address where Liam had picked up the couch. It didn't belong to Margaret. The homeowners were an elderly couple who had been on a 3-week cruise in Europe. Their house had been systematically burglarized while they were gone. Margaret wasn't an old woman downsizing her furniture. She was part of a highly organized burglary ring. Their method was brilliant and deeply unsettling. They would target affluent homes while the owners were on vacation. They would steal heavy, valuable items, silverware, coins, jewelry. But carrying bags of stolen goods out of a house in broad daylight is suspicious. So they used furniture. They would find a large piece of furniture already in the victim's house, like an emerald green sofa hollow out the bottom, stash the stolen goods inside, and then list the couch on Facebook Marketplace for dirt cheap. Unwitting buyers like Liam would rent a truck, drive up to the house in broad daylight, carry the couch out the front door, and drive away. To the neighbors, it just looked like someone buying furniture. The buyers were doing the heavy lifting for the thieves. But the nightmare didn't end there for Liam. The notebook found in the couch wasn't just a ledger of stolen goods. It was a tracking log. The thieves would wait a few weeks for the heat to die down. Then, using the address the buyer had provided during the marketplace exchange, they would break into the buyer's house, slice open the couch, retrieve their stolen loot, and vanish. When the police showed Liam the final page of the notebook, the blood drained from his face. The last entry was his name, his new apartment address, and a date circled in red ink. The date was the following Tuesday. If Liam hadn't dropped his phone between the cushions, he would have been asleep in his bed when the people who orchestrated the burglary came to collect their prize. Our final story requires a bit of context about the modern world. We are obsessed with disconnecting. People pay thousands of dollars to go to cabins in the middle of nowhere, just to stare at trees and pretend the internet doesn't exist. It's a luxury to be unreachable, until someone actually reaches you. This post was submitted by user Wanderlust Wendy, detailing a terrifying ordeal her brother Mark experienced last November. Mark was a software developer in Seattle, burned out, stressed, and desperate for a week of total silence. He found a listing on a popular short-term rental app for a remote A-frame cabin in the dense woods of the Olympic Peninsula. The listing proudly boasted no Wi-Fi, no cell service. Just you in the wilderness. Mark booked it instantly. For the first 2 days, the isolation was exactly what he needed. He read by the wood stove, drank cheap coffee on the porch, and enjoyed the deafening silence of the Pacific Northwest. On the morning of the third day, Mark walked out onto the wooden deck and found a gift waiting for him. Sitting perfectly centered on the welcome mat was a small, intricate bundle of twigs tied together with a piece of faded red yarn. At first, Mark chuckled. He assumed it was some quirky, rustic touch left by the property owner. Maybe the wind blew it there, or maybe a local kid was messing around. He snapped a picture, and when he drove 20 miles into town for groceries to get a single bar of cell service, he texted the photo to his sister Wendy. He jokingly called it Blair Witch Room service. Wendy posted the photo to a creepy subreddit, mostly just to share the eerie aesthetic. But on day 4, the gifts escalated. Mark woke up, made his coffee, and opened the front door. Sitting on the welcome mat was a deer skull. It wasn't bloody or decaying. It was bleached perfectly white, scrubbed clean, and positioned so the empty eye sockets were staring directly at the front door. Mark stopped laughing. The nearest neighbor was supposed to be 3 miles away down a dirt logging road. He checked the perimeter of the cabin but found no footprints in the thick bed of pine needles. He decided he was leaving the next morning. One more night, then he was packing up. He locked the doors, pulled the curtains shut, and spent the evening watching downloaded movies on his laptop, trying to ignore the absolute darkness pressing against the glass. At 2 a.m., Mark woke up to a sound. It was coming from the large, triangular window at the front of the A-frame. Mark froze in his bed. He listened. The tapping stopped. Then he heard the undeniable sound of heavy boots walking across the wooden planks of the front deck, slowly, methodically, pacing back and forth. Mark didn't have a weapon. He didn't have cell service. He was trapped in a wooden box 50 miles from civilization. He waited in agonizing silence until the sun finally began to rise, turning the sky a bruised, dull gray. When he was absolutely certain the deck was empty, he grabbed his keys, threw his bags in his car, and cautiously opened the front door. Sitting on the welcome mat was a third item. It was a Polaroid photograph. Mark picked it up. His stomach hit the floor. It was a photo of Mark, sleeping in the cabin's bed, taken from inside the room. Mark didn't lock the door behind him. He threw his car into gear and sped down the logging road until he hit the highway, driving all the way back to Seattle before he finally called the police. Wendy, terrified by her brother's frantic phone call, updated the Reddit post with the new information. And this is where the internet hive mind did what it does best, uncovering a backstory that makes the skin crawl. Users on the subreddit started reverse searching the images of the cabin from the rental listing. They scoured property records for the county. The cabin was real, but the listing was a complete fabrication. The police drove out to the property the following day. When they arrived, the cabin was empty. They contacted the actual owner of the property, a retired man living in Arizona, who used the cabin purely as a summer hunting lodge. He had never listed it on any rental app. The detectives brought in a forensics team. As they searched the small cabin, one officer noticed the wood paneling behind the master bedroom closet felt loose. He pried it back with a crowbar. Behind the wall was a small, insulated crawl space. Inside the crawl space, they found a sleeping mat, several empty cans of food, a vintage Polaroid camera, and a crude hand-drawn map of the cabin's floor plan. But worst of all, they found a small peephole drilled directly through the wood paneling. The peephole looked right down onto the bed where Mark had been sleeping. The person who created the listing wasn't a property manager. They were a squatter. They had broken into the empty hunting cabin, set up a living space inside the walls, and then took photos of the property. They created a fake listing online, offering an absurdly cheap rate for a digital detox to lure people in. People looking for isolation. People who wanted to be unreachable. The squatter wasn't interested in the rental money. They just wanted someone to watch. They would wait for the guests to fall asleep, slip out from behind the wall, leave their little gifts, and document their terror. The police never caught the person in the walls. The account on the rental app was deleted, traced back to a burner phone purchased with cash. To this day, Mark sleeps with every light in his Seattle apartment turned on. And whenever he hears the floorboards settle in the middle of the night, he can't help but wonder if the person in the walls ever truly left, or if they just found a new place to hide. The internet gives us the illusion of connection, but it also provides a perfect mask for those who want to reach through the screen and touch our reality. Whether it's the house you thought was secure, the cheap furniture you brought into your living room, or the remote getaway you booked to escape the world. True horror doesn't come from ghosts or monsters. It comes from the realization that ordinary life is incredibly fragile. And sometimes you are just an unwitting character in someone else's twisted game. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the dark side of the web. And if you have a terrifying true story of your own, submit it to the email in the description below. Until next time, check your locks, inspect your furniture, and maybe don't turn off all the lights tonight. Stay safe out there.